recently the India-Israel relationship were in news. So here we are gonna understand how India built its relationship with Israel and Palestine in the backdrop of Israel-Palestine conflict. So throwing light on the history of India's relationship with these two conflicting nations, India's policy on the longest running conflict in the world has gone from being unequivocal pro-Palestine for the first 4 decades to a balancing act with its 3-decade-old friendly ties with Israel. In recent years, India's position has been perceived as pro-Israel. As UN assemblies, either India is absent when scenario was built to vote against Israel from 1991 onward, whereas before this, India proactively supported Palestine and Palestinian claim on the conflicted territories. Way back in 1948, during the creation of Israel, India voted against the creation, and India is the only non-Arab state among 13 countries that voted against the UN partition plan of Palestine, the General Assembly that led to the creation of Israel. So the question arises, why India didn't support this partition plan of UN General Assembly and supported Palestine as a whole? So India's own partition along religious lines, its principled state against the colonialism and its effect, solidarity with the Palestinian people. This all built India's support to Palestine. The effect of Pakistan's plan to isolate India over Kashmir and India's energy dependency on Arab countries also added on that. However, India formally recognized Israel in September 1950 but didn't having any kind of diplomatic relation or political relation up till 1992. It's only before the 1991 LPG reforms in India that we established diplomatic relation with Israel. So putting it aside, we will focus on the diplomatic relation between India and Israel that has completed 30 years. The relationship has evolved with India of late walking a tightrope between its ties with Israel and Palestine. And as we already follow up the background, they announced its recognition of Israel on September 17, 1950 and established diplomatic relation only in 1990. However, the political relation has improved considerably in the last few years, especially after PM Modi's visit in 2017, which is seen as an historic first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Israel. So when we are discussing the relationship of two nations with each other, we have to focus on some dimensions. So as per this say, we are looking holistically to India-Israel relationship by studying things under different dimensions like economic and commercial relations. So the bilateral mercantile trade with Israel has considerably increased from $200 million in 1992 to $5.65 billion in 2018-19, and this when we excluding the defense procurement which we made from Israel. The balance of trade is in India's favor by $1.8 billion, and also India is the third largest trade partner in Asia for Israel, and when we put it globally, India is the 7th largest trade partner of Israel. Under the dimension of investment that both countries were done, so Indian investment in Israel from April 2000 to June 2017 has a total of $122.4 million and around 300 investment from Israel in India, mainly in the high-tech domain and in agriculture. So when agriculture is there, we will focus on the agriculture as a different silos itself. India has benefited from Israeli expertise and technologies in horticulture, mechanization, protected cultivation, orchard and canopy management, nursery management, micro-irrigation and post-harvest management. As we all know, Israel is a nation enriched with oil reserves and having a dried atmosphere. Still, they manage to grow agricultural produce. So they build a expertise in this field as how to use minimum resources for maximum harvest under unfavorable conditions. In the sector of defense, there are regular exchanges between the armed forces. There is cooperation on security issues, including a joint working group on counter-terrorism. And this is very important when we have our neighborhood like Pakistan and China, and we all know what happened in Afghanistan in February 2020. Israel has been among India's top 3 arms supplier for the last 5 years. India and Israel have jointly developed the MRSAM or the Barak 8 air defense system. In the domain of science and technology, what we have achieved or both the countries has made possible are as a MOU for establishing India-Israel Industrial Research and Development and Innovation Fund, which we can write as small I, Mark 4 and capital F, by the Department of Science and Technology, India and the National Authority for Technological Innovation, Israel was signed in 2017. This MOU with a contribution of $20 million from each side over 5 years is playing an important role in enabling Indian and Israeli enterprises to undertake joint research and development projects. So this is all about a summarized form of India and Israel relation, what is going on right now. If we want to go back and learn about the India and Palestinian relationship and how India's pro-Palestine stand turns around the balance between Palestine and Israel and maintaining diplomatic relations with both countries. So at the 53rd UN session, India co-sponsored the draft resolution on the right of the Palestinian to self-determination. In the 1967 and 1973 wars, India lashed out at Israel as the aggressor. In 1975, India became the first non-Arab country to recognize the PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people and invited it to open an office in Delhi, which was accorded diplomatic status 5 years later. This is all under the backdrop of the conflicts and war between Israel and Palestine. In 1988, when the PLO declared an independent state of Palestine with its capital in East Jerusalem, India granted recognition immediately. India voted for Palestine to become a full member of UNESCO in 2011 and a year later co-sponsored the UN General Assembly resolution that enabled Palestine to become a non-member observer state at the UN without voting rights. India has supported the installation of Palestinian flag on the UN premises in September 2015. This is what happening up till 2011. Now, what's the scenario after 2014 or after 2015? We followed a new policy and that called as policy of de-hyphenization. India abstained from voting at UN Human Rights Council on a resolution which claimed to highlight evidence of alleged war crimes committed by Israel forces and Hamas during the 2014 airstrikes against Gaza that killed over 2,000 people. In 2016, India again abstained from a UNHRC resolution against Israel. And following that, in the year 2017, during the visit of the PLO chief Mahmoud Abbas, the reference of East Jerusalem was missing in the statement issued by the Indian Prime Minister, whereas historically India supported Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. And these stand of the PM was contrary to stand iterated by the Indian President during his visit by Ramallah, site of Palestine. In 2018, PM Modi became the first ever Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel. At this visit, the PM skipped the visit to Palestinian de facto capital. This move was seen as Indian pursuing a policy of de-hyphenization wherein it would deal with Israel and Palestine separately, and relationship of India with one nation didn't affect its relationship with the other one. The de-hyphenization is actually a careful balancing act with India shifting from one side to another as the situation demands. This was clearly visible when India has voted in favor of a resolution in the General Assembly opposing the Trump administration's recognition of Jerusalem as the Israel capital. This is what India used to support, but in this resolution, our stand is in opposition. And that's the difference we can clearly see. At the UNHRC 46th session in Geneva earlier in this year itself, India voted against Israel in 3 resolutions. One on the right of self-determination of Palestinian people, a second on Israel's settlement policy, and a third on the human rights situation in the Golan Heights. Recently, the International Criminal Court, that we can say as ICC, claimed jurisdiction to investigate human rights abuses in Palestinian territory, including West Bank and Gaza, and named both Israeli security forces and Hamas as perpetrator. Israel PM wanted India to take a stand because India does not recognize International Criminal Court. However, India did not take any step up till now. It may do so in future. Thus, India has been following a policy where it is taking stands on the issue on a case-to-case basis, and it can be said that the policy of dehyphenization is a work in progress. So this is something we learn as what India's stand historically on Palestine and Israel's conflict. Then we learn what India's say right now at this conflict and how India is not engaging in their conflict and balancing its own relationship with both countries and turning sides on international institutions like UN General Assembly on case-to-case basis, and how we can build our relationship further and cooperate on different dimensions of economy, defense, agriculture and other. And this is the fact. For defense procurement, we largely depend on Israel, which is our third largest trading partner in defense sector. So maintaining relationship with both the countries is very important for India. So this is done for now. We will meet in the next video. Thank you.